my little transition. Summary of last week, if you didn't hear it, but we talked Revelation 12. We had a woman we were introduced to, clothed with the sun, standing on the moon, had 12 stars around her head, and she was seen as in labor, giving birth. And I feel like that is a image of the Israel who the Messiah would descend from. And we had another player, the great red dragon, serpent of old from Genesis 3:15. In fact, this chapter just throws out several names for this being: Satan, the accuser, the devil, the slanderer, a traitor. Says he deceived the whole world, and he accuses the brethren. Um, I really got to find a better program than PowerPoint. I'm just going to move on from that one. We had the male child that the woman was carrying. He was born. The dragon was seeking to devour the child the minute he was born. The child is destined to rule with a rod of iron. I feel like referring back to Genesis 49:10. And he was called up to the throne of God. The dragon seeks to destroy the child. He's seeking to destroy the woman, and he also will, as we get to the end of this, seek after the offspring, those who put their faith in the child. Like I said last week, we have 7 main characters in this and the next chapter. As I said, woman is the nation of Israel, the dragon is Satan, the male child is the Messiah, and we'll try to move on to some of the other ones. This is the verse we left off on last week. Then the woman fled into the wilderness, where she had a place prepared by God that they should feed her 1,260 days. And the question I left off last week is, where is she going? Now, I'm going to say up front, these are opinions based on what is gleaned out of Scripture in the Old Testament. One of the things in Daniel 11:41, it makes a reference to the what is the word? What we're going to call the Antichrist. But like I've said a few weeks, there's a whole bunch of names for this guy. Antichrist is probably the poorest one in the Bible, but that's what we know him as in Christianity. But he's going to take the Holy Land. He will take all of it, but it makes a reference to these lands shall escape from his hand. Edom, Moab, and the prominent people of Ammon. Well, today in our map, we know that is Jordan. So this guy takes possession of the whole world, but for some reason, this area he's unable to possess. And this is most of this area is a wilderness. It's Bedouins today, roaming. There's nothing here. And how can you not take possession from an earthly standpoint of, you go out in the middle of the Sahara, they'd probably give it to you. But for some reason, he's prevented from taking this area. Now I'm on Micah 2:12. I will surely assemble, O Jacob, all of thee. I will surely gather the remnant of Israel. I will put them together as the sheep of Basra. As the flock in the midst of their fold, they shall make great noise by reason of the multitude of men. Basra in Hebrew means sheepfold, but it is also the name of a town. If you remember Indiana Jones and the Last Crusade, you might recognize the picture because part of that movie was filmed in the ancient city of Petra, which Petra naturally resembles a sheepfold. It's one of those places in the world. If I had a chance, if I went to the Holy Land, I would love to go to Petra too. It's like in the middle of a mountain, and there's only one way in. It's about wide enough for maybe two horses. You've got to go literally through a crack in the mountain to get into it. Now, classically, a sheepfold was, you had a gate that you kept the sheep in, and the gate is where the shepherd laid. So he laid across the gate to make sure the sheep didn't come out of the fold. There was only one way in or out. Jesus also makes a comment in other places of the Bible. Anybody that comes in except through the gate is a thief or a robber trying to get around the sheepfold. Well, Petra, its name in other languages is Basra, which is a reference to a sheepfold. Petra is a reference to a rock. It's also Selah, and I can't remember that reference. Arnold Frukenbaum feels like that this is where they are going to be running to. Also, Tim LaHaye, if you read any of the Left Behind, this is why this city pops up there, because it seems to suggest somewhere in this area. Now, this city, there was an earthquake here about 600 AD. There's nobody that lives in this. This city has been vacant other than tourist traffic since 600 AD. Other side note, this is probably, which just gets into a lot of history, this is probably the actual Mecca that the Quran refers to, but the evidence, in my opinion, seems to point to this being what the Quran is talking about, but Muslims are not allowed to question or examine their book compared to historical documents, and good luck convincing them of that. Isaiah 63:1. Who is this who comes from Edom with dyed garments from Basra? This is one who is glorious in his apparel, traveling in the greatness of his strength. I who speak in righteousness, mighty to save. And I do encourage anybody to go read these in full context. This is Jesus returning. He's seeing having come from Basra, having stained his garments in blood. So it's kind of interesting. This hints that when Jesus physically comes back to earth, the first place he runs to is Basra. Well, if the remnant that is being pursued is there, that makes sense. They're messing with the apple of his eye. So I feel like I agree with what I've read, that they're going to be somewhere in the neighborhood of Petra. That's the direction they're fleeing. There are other opinions. in some of this, you're teasing stuff out of the scriptures. Revelation is trying to put together, is pulling from the whole Bible, assembling thoughts that are started and sometimes never completed all through the Old Testament and New Testament. But now, what is the 1260 days? Okay. Several times in the text, it makes reference to a time period. And I will throw up a few scriptures to show, but it'll 3.5 years. That was weird. 3.5 years. It'll call it 42 months. 1260 days in this passage where she was given wings of an eagle and went for and was taken care of by God for 1260 days. Daniel 9:27. Why does it keep doing that? Which you'll hear me hammer Daniel 9:27 quite a bit. I'll review it. And when I went over this before, this is dealing with that last period of 7 years that starts when he, referring to this prince who is to come, will confirm a covenant with the many. The many is the nation of Israel. He shall confirm a covenant with the many for 1 week or one period of 7. But in the middle of the week he shall bring an end to sacrifice and offering, and on the wings of abomination shall be one who makes desolate, even until the consummation which is determined is poured out on the desolate. So in the middle of this 7-year time period, he is going to desecrate the temple and set up some kind of idol, we don't know what. So that divides this 7-year period into 3.5 and 3.5. But it is worth noting, when the disciples came up and asked Jesus about when he was coming back, in Matthew 24 and Mark 13 and Luke 21, but Matthew and Mark make a more direct reference to it, he refers back to this and says, therefore, when you see the abomination of desolation spoken of by Daniel the prophet standing in the holy place. So when you see this happen and this thing standing in that temple, whoever reads, let him understand. Let those who are in Judea flee to the mountains. I believe Mark also says, if you're on the roof, don't go down and get your coat. Don't, you get out of town, now, because it's fixing to get rough for those who see this. Daniel 7:25. Once again, we're speaking of this character in the Bible. He shall speak pompous words against the Most High. He shall persecute the saints of the Most High, and shall intend to change the times and the laws. And then the saints shall be given into his hand for a time, times, and half a times. Hebrew has a concept called a dual. A time is 1 year, times is a dual, that's 2 years, and half a time is half a year. So that's 3.5 years again. That's what I'm trying to paint is there's a constant reference in the prophetic scriptures of this 3.5 year period. We tend to call the whole 7-year period as the tribulation, and that's kind of true, but the real bad time is the second half. It is known as the time of Jacob's trouble, the time of great distress, You know, Jesus says it's a time unlike anything has ever happened in the world, nor will happen again. You know, that's one of the things I look at with like the preterist view that tries to say that this was all fulfilled in 70 AD. Well, a lot of cities have been sieged. Um, what happened in 70 AD was not unlike anything that's happened throughout history. I mean, I'd argue the Holocaust for the Jews was way worse than 70 AD. You know, what the Bible alludes to, and it always has the phrase Jacob's trouble, the latter days. Even Moses refers to this in Deuteronomy, which I did not include up here, but in my research, it's like Moses knew this was going to happen. Daniel 12 is a very interesting chapter. You got to read Daniel 11 in because Daniel 11 is what he's seeing, and then in 12 he does not understand what he's seeing, and he's asking the angel or that's in front of him, what is this? And he's told clues, but he's also told you're not going to understand. This is sealed to you. Just write it down, and you're going to go to sleep with your fathers. But in this, he heard a man clothed in linen who was above the waters of the river. That when he held up his right hand and his left hand to heaven and swore by him who lives forever, forever, that it shall be for a time, times, and half a time, when the power of the holy people has been completely shattered, all these things shall be finished. Now, as I'm going to get to further, during this time, these saints, except for those that make it into Petra, are handed over to him. He is allowed for a time to persecute and kill those who have their faith in the Messiah. Now I'm pulling a verse out of the next chapter, which continues on this theme, but so they worshiped the dragon. Remember this chapter, the dragon is Satan, who gave authority to the beast. The beast is, well, everybody knows as the Antichrist. And they worshiped the beast, saying, who is like the beast? Who is able to make war with him? And he was given a mouth speaking great and blasphemous things. Here's that reference back to Daniel again. And he was giving authority to continue for 42 months, 3.5 years. That's what I say. What I'm trying to allude to is that 3.5 years keep showing up as you get into the prophetic text. And this one is interesting because it has an extra 30 days and an extra 75 days. But we're back in Daniel 12. From the time the daily sacrifice is taken away and the abomination of desolation is set up, back to Daniel 9:27, there shall be 1,290 days, and then blessed is he who waits and comes to the 1,335 days. And in this case, many interpret on the 1260th day is when Jesus comes to rescue his people, and puts a stop. Satan's program's over at this point. It's time to put a stop to this. And these extra days are where he's judging Satan, the false prophet, the Antichrist, and starting to set up for the millennial kingdom, which is spoken more of in chapters 19 and 20. Yeah. Okay. They've covered about 20 pages already. Revelations 12:14. The woman was given two wings of a great eagle, that she might fly into the wilderness to her place where she is nourished for a time, times, and half a time again. That's why I put that there. I'm going to do that. I'm going to get to that scripture again when I'm pointing out. It repeats it again at 42 months in 12:6. Now in 12:14, it repeats it again. So I think I've killed that horse, right? All right. So the woman's headed to the wilderness. 12:7. And there was war in heaven, Michael and his angels warring against the dragon, and the dragon and his angels warred. Now I'll go in. I thought I had paired this up because it stops in the middle of the sentence to go to the next verse, so I thought I had paired them together, but remember my list earlier, the next person on that list was Michael. Who is Michael? He's only mentioned a couple times in the Bible, and there's only two angels ever actually named in the Bible, Michael and Gabriel. The rest are generally unnamed servants. We don't ever know their name. But Michael is the only angel the Bible specifically names as an archangel. Arch means head, ruler, the guy who's in charge. That root comes into our English word as architect. You know, he's the one that designs the building. The building don't get built without the architect sitting down and laying out the blueprints. So as far as an angel, he has a lot of authority. Text says he stands guard over Israel. In Jude 4, he directly opposes Satan. They're arguing over the body of Moses, and or Jude chapter 9, not chapter 9, verse 9. Jude only has one chapter, but it's a weird statement that you don't have anything else in the Bible explaining what's going on, but Michael and Satan are arguing over the body of Moses. And in this, Michael says the only four words recorded to him in the Bible: the Lord rebuke you. In the text it mentions him. It's clear he's a military commander, as we're going to see in this. And he also, in Daniel 10, where Gabriel is sent to explain something to Daniel, Gabriel gets held up by something we don't know what in the spiritual realm in Persia, I think. And Michael has to come and fight off whatever is trying to prevent Gabriel from coming to Daniel. And it's some of those things that you read and it's like, it just doesn't fully explain it. But there is. Oh, there's a lot more that goes on that we don't see. This is Daniel 12:1. I'm back in chapter 12, but at that time Michael shall stand up, the great prince who stands watch over the sons of your people, and there shall be a time of trouble such as never was since there was a nation, even to that time. And at that time your people shall be delivered, every one who is found written in the book. So we're seeing Michael stand in heaven, and he's warring against this third of the angels that fell with Satan. And the dragon warred against Michael and his angels, but he did not prevail, nor was place found for them in heaven anymore. The dragon was cast out, the old serpent called devil and Satan, who deceives the whole world. He was cast out into the earth, and his angels were cast out with him. And I heard a great voice in the heavens, now has come the salvation and power and the kingdom of our God and the authority of his Christ. For the accuser of our brethren is cast down, who accused them before God day and night. The salvation that's mentioned here, these notes are for John Woward, who was the president of Dallas Theological Seminary. He's since passed on. The salvation mentioned here is the deliverance from Satan and the completion of the divine program. God is now going to strengthen his own and manifest his own power. The kingdom is the millennial kingdom, is spoken of all through the Old Testament and the New Testament. It's what the disciples and the people were looking for, was the millennial kingdom, when the Messiah will rule on earth on David's throne. Satan's days of accusing those who trusted in the Messiah are over. His access to the heaven at this point has ended. And I'm sure most of us have seen this verse before. How you are fallen from the heaven, O Lucifer, son of the morning. How you are cut down to the ground, you who weaken the nations. Which is, you're seeing played out in this chapter with Michael. He's throwing him out of. But interestingly, if you go to Luke 10:8, and for background, Jesus has sent the 70 out. They come back. He cast demons out and all, and they're telling him. He replied to him, I saw Satan fall like lightning from heaven. And so, when did these events happen? Have they happened yet, or are they going to happen? I think they're happening in the future, but there is some discussion on this. We know in Job, Satan has some access to heaven based on Job first chapter, verse 6. One day the angels came to present themselves before the Lord, and Satan came also with them. And then you go on in the first chapters of Job. But at this point, whether Isaiah is looking forward to this time, or this is something, Satan's ability to access heaven ends here. And they overcame him because of the blood of the Lamb and because of the word of their testimony, and they did not love their souls unto death. The victory of the saints is revealed through the use of three strong spiritual weapons. Satan's accusations are nullified by the blood of the Lamb. He can chase us to the cross, but the cross is that line. Once you cross over into Jesus, accept Jesus, Satan, I won't say he can attack he can't do anything to you after you leave this earth. It may not be the best way to explain what I'm trying to say, but it is our faith in the blood of the Lamb and his sacrifice on the cross that restores us to God, which is what Satan took away from Adam and Eve and us as his descendants. The testimony of the believer opposes the deceiving work of Satan in that the power of the gospel is the power unto God for salvation. The fact that our lives are a testimony that we're not depending on ourselves. We're depending on Jesus. We're depending on the gospel, his promise. He will, if you believe in me.
I heard a preacher kind of describe it one way one time, like that we have a preview of the script, and it was seen before it ever happened, and what's going on now is it's all being played out.
It is.
And that's why the Bible seems to be out of organization, because that's the way man put it together. And we have these things coming to pass. You know, we get to witness things that have already been talked about.
Oh, we're living in times that uh, the prophets wish they could have seen. But I would say, like, Isaiah was shown certain things, Daniel was shown certain things. So they're seeing bits and pieces. And it's when you start comparing and you start getting the bigger picture. But the third, they were willing to give their lives in the belief of the power of the gospel. I will make one analogy. It's one of the things that started me studying what Islam taught, because when 9/11 happened, those people flew those planes willingly into buildings. You got to believe, or you're not. I mean, if you don't believe in whatever you're being told, you would have never done that.
Yeah, that kind of faith.
These people believe to the point there would your threat on my life means nothing. I'll just be asleep for a short while.
And during World War II, the Japanese was flying into, using their planes as dive bombers. They'd given up. They had a belief too.
Yeah,
They had a strong belief to do that.
they did.
It's easier to take a people that has nothing. They get up every day, they have nothing. It's easier to get them to have the faith than it is for us to wake up to an alarm clock, put our food in the microwave. Some of these people, and the faith we see in other cultures goes way past our faith.
Yeah.
Because we're so spoiled.
The
And I'm afraid it's going to hinder a lot of us here in this country. Because you take Ethiopia, a born again child of God of Ethiopia that's still living, even though they're a child of God, they're still grabbing used things out of the ditch and sleeping in huts in the rain, dripping in on them, no AC, heat and stuff like that. And for someone to have nothing, it's easier for them to believe.
it is.
What I'm trying to say is we're hindered.
Yeah, because we depend on ourselves. But I will say the big difference in Japan and Islam, the emperor in Japanese was their god. He was alive. He could step forward and say, "Stop fighting." The only person who can tell the devout Muslim to stop fighting died in 620 AD. Muhammad would have to tell him to stop, and he's not here. So he didn't even expect he was going to die. Yeah, that gets into your biggest argument in Islam between the Shia and the Sunni. But Therefore rejoice, O heavens, and those tabernacling in them. Woe to the inhabitants of the earth in the sea and in the sea, for the devil came down to you having great wrath, knowing he has a little time. See, this show is ending.
In our real lifetime, someone writes a book and then they make a movie out of it.
Well, we read the book. We're just watching the movie.
Yeah. Well, heaven is rejoicing over this victory. You know, he's out. They're cheering what they're watching. But it's also a woe to the people on the earth because he knows he's got 3.5 years. He knows. He can read this book just like we can. He probably knows things we don't. And when the dragon saw that he was cast to the earth, he persecuted the woman who bore the male child. Like I've said last week, Hosea 5:15, Jesus and Luke when he's riding into the city, Zechariah 12:10, the people who rejected the Messiah, that nation, those descendants have to repent and call for him to come. If Satan could wipe them out, he could thwart God's plan. But that ain't going to happen. Now we're back to verse 14. And the woman was given 2 wings of a great eagle, that she might fly into the wilderness to her place where she is nourished for a time, times, and half a time from the presence of the serpent. This goes back to what I said earlier. Presence, where she's going, he can't go. And we see in Daniel, there's this area roughly where Jordan is that the Antichrist is not going to be allowed to go for some reason. Satan, after being cast down, immediately goes after the woman. This is the beginning of the Great Tribulation, the time of Jacob's trouble, the time that's unlike anything that will ever happen again or before or since. God steps in to block Satan's attempt. The reference to 2 wings of an eagle is derived from Exodus 19:4 and Deuteronomy 32:11 and 12 and similar passages where God uses the strength of an eagle to illustrate his faithfulness to care for the descendants of Jacob. You know, he's not going to let Satan succeed in this.
Sometimes I think time is our worst enemy because we, being like we are, we look at everything in time. Well, time is,
I'll do that tomorrow.
yeah, we're thinking, could all this going to happen in the future, or has it happened before us, or is it actually happening all right now? So, because time is a human thing. You know,
Well, I tend to take the view that this is talking about things that are going to happen in the future.
well, because it hadn't happened to us yet.
But I'm pulling from most of the Old Testament and the New Testament that keeps referring to this time period.
Well, could this be a continuous thing going on?
I don't think so, because like I said, this is a time that's never happened before, and it's so bad it will never happen again. It refers to a 3.5 year period where the Jews are going to be just battered against the wall. They're going to have to flee, and if
Because, there's some places that have gone through a lot of stuff like this.
but has it reached a point
Earthquakes.
The clarifier for me is where Jesus says, unlike anything that has ever happened or will happen again. Like I said earlier, the Jews, 70 AD, when the temple fell, to the Jew is regarded as one of the worst times in the world. And then 135 AD, they were scattered, the revolt of Bar Kokhba. And that's the worst. I mean, they were forbidden from going into Jerusalem. Then there was the Holocaust. That's probably the worst. But, you know, this is going to be worse than those kind of events for them. It's
Almost like it's building.
it's
Like it should have been slightly worse than the previous one, but this last one's gonna be worse.
well, this is, I mean, you look at the Japanese, get out of the Jewish people, the Japanese, and they came in and said, we're going to restore Asia to Asian people. And they prompt something that we kind of hear being repeated today in this critical race theory thing. But when the Japanese came in, they were worse than the people they run out. I mean, if you read about the rape of Nanking and what they did to Guam and what they did to the Koreans, and that's pretty bad. But we're heading into a time that Jesus said it's going to be worse than anything you've seen. And it's never going to be repeated again. He's not going to let it happen again. So
It also talks about the Christians will be saved from all of this.
yeah,
I think that's why we're not seeing.
we're up in heaven.
Some people are seeing a lot of bad things happen.
Yeah, well, we're up in heaven. The whole purpose of this time period is to put the Jews against the wall where they will finally recognize and call for their Messiah.
We're in the last days now.
Yeah, but we've been in the last days in a sense since Acts. We're getting into the last of the last days,
We're
but
in the last generation.
but you know, that time period in Daniel between the 69th and 70 week, they rejected Jesus. The gospel has been given out to the Gentiles. You know, there's a certain point in Acts where he tells them to go out, and you see Paul's missions as to the Gentiles. Well, at some point, it's going to come back to the Jewish people. And that when it does, it starts these events that are talked about in this book. Let me get through these last two. Then, did I read this? Okay. Then from his mouth the serpent spewed water like a river to overtake the woman and sweep her away with the torrent. But the earth helped the woman by opening up its mouth and swallowing the river that the dragon had spewed out of its mouth. A lot of times in the Bible, rivers are seen as like armies, or used as a descriptive term of armies. Or this may be something that actually happened. Don't know. All I can really say for sure is Satan makes a definite attempt, and God uses the earth to stop that attempt so that the woman can flee to safety. Then the dragon was enraged at the woman and went off to make war against the rest of her offspring, those who obey God's commandment and hold to the testimony of Jesus. If Satan can't get the remnant, he will seek those he can get to. He will turn his attention to anyone who has put faith in the Messiah during this time period. Daniel 7:25 again states that the saints of this period shall be given into his hand for a time, times, and half a time. So those who are alive in this period, Satan, if he wants to kill you, you know, he's going to have his reign for 3.5 years.
Unless you're in Petra.
Unless you're in Petra, that one area. Which, like I said, if you look at that area, there's nothing there. It doesn't make it makes sense, but it doesn't make sense. There's nothing desirable there, really. It's desolate. I mean, Jordan is really a very poor country because there's no real natural resources. It's desert. But this was my list from earlier. Now we've Michael the archangel, the warrior angel. He's the angel that stands watch over the descendants of Jacob. And the remnant is the rest of her offspring, those who during this time period have put their faith in Christ. In the next chapter, we have the beast of the sea and the beast of the earth. But that is the last slide, so I will stop there.